In my family's universe, there are two kinds of military service. The first is the real kind. It's forged in mud and sweat, measured in miles, rucked and brass polished. It has the satisfying heft of a rifle in your hands and the honorable grit of dirt under your fingernails. It's the world my father knew, the world he revered. It was the army. And then there was my kind of service, the kind that happens in silent, air-conditioned rooms where the only sound is the hum of servers and the frantic tapping of keyboards. The kind where battles are fought with lines of code, and the territory being defended is a satellite's orbital path or a nation's power grid. It was the U.S. Space Force, and in my family's eyes, it was a joke. What's up, everyone? My name is Alina, and if this is your first time here, I'm a brigadier general in the United States military. But if you were to ask my dad, he'd tell you I'm a keyboard officer, a space cadet, a glorified desk jockey, who wouldn't know a real challenge if it hit her in the face. If you've ever had your greatest accomplishment completely misunderstood and redefined as a failure by the people you love most, then you are in the right place. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because you're going to understand this story on a spiritual level. The hero of our family, the one carrying the torch of my father's legacy, is my younger sister, Private Chloe Vance. As I'm telling you this, Chloe is probably somewhere at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, low crawling through a mud pit or learning how to disassemble an M4 rifle blindfolded. She is miserable, exhausted, and pushed to her physical and mental limits, and my family has never been prouder. Her suffering is a badge of honor, her exhaustion is proof of her commitment. Her choice to enlist in the army, to get her hands dirty, was seen as the most noble thing a Vance could do. My choice to accept an ROTC scholarship to Carnegie Mellon for computer engineering and then get a direct commission into the newest, most technical branch of the armed forces that was seen as taking the easy way out, a clever workaround to avoid the real military. My father is the sun around which our family's military opinions orbit. He's a retired command sergeant major, a title he holds with more reverence than a king holds his crown. For 30 years, he was Army infantry. He was a door kicker, a leader of men, a man who believed that true strength was measured in your ability to endure hardship. He respects drill sergeants more than he respects politicians, and he trusts a grunt with a rifle more than an officer with a PhD. He loves me, I know he does, but he doesn't respect my career. He can't. It's a foreign language to him. My battlefield is invisible, my enemy is intangible, and my victories are classified. How can you take pride in something you can't see, touch, or tell your buddies about at the VFW hall? My mother, bless her heart, is the family's frantic, full-time peacekeeper. Her primary mission is to ensure my father's worldview is not overly disturbed. This usually means that in any family gathering, I'm expected to be the one to yield. I'm expected to downplay my work, to nod along when he talks about real soldiering, and to not take it personally when he calls my sister's grueling 10-week training cycle more impressive than my 2 decades of service. Chloe, for her part, has drunk the Kool-Aid. She's not mean, but she's 20 years old and desperate for Dad's approval. For her entire life, she was Alina's little sister, the one who wasn't the academic genius. My path was books and scholarships. It was a world she couldn't compete in, so she chose a different arena, one where she could finally be the star, her father's arena. Enlisting was her power move, and it worked. She now holds the one title I never could, my father's hero. She treats me with a kind of affectionate pity, like I'm a fragile, brilliant bird in a cage, while she's an eagle soaring in the real world. The foundation for this was poured when I was 18. I sat my parents down in our living room to tell them I'd been offered a full Air Force ROTC scholarship to study computer engineering. It was a huge deal, a full ride to a top-tier university and a guaranteed commission as an officer. I was ecstatic. My father listened patiently. When I was done, he sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. ROTC, huh, he said, the disappointment clear in his voice. It's the easy way in. Elena. A shortcut. They wine you and dine you at a fancy college. You play soldier on the weekends, and then they just hand you those gold bars. It's not the same as earning it from the ground up. Dad, it's still a commission. I'll be an officer in the Air Force. The Air Force, he said, the words tasting like something sour in his mouth. The chair force. Look, I'm not saying it's nothing, but it ain't the Army. And being an officer ain't the same as being a soldier. That was it. The conversation was over. His judgment was passed. Years later, when Chloe, who had struggled to get a C average in high school, announced she was enlisting as a private, my father cried tears of joy. He was prouder of her decision to start at the absolute bottom than he had ever been of any of my promotions. This dismissal of my world continued throughout my career. When I was a captain, I was selected for a highly competitive deployment to the Cheyenne Mountain Complex. I was leading a team monitoring for ballistic missile launches. It was 3 months in a sealed, underground bunker, a high-pressure, no-fail mission. I couldn't tell my family the details, only that I was being deployed to a secure facility in Colorado, a deployment to the Rocky Mountains my father had scoffed on the phone. Must be rough, let me know how the skiing is. When I deployed, we had sand, and more sand. He couldn't see the enemy I was watching, he couldn't feel the pressure of the work, so, to him, it was a vacation. It was another example of my soft service. The worst was always the talk about uniforms. My dad keeps a framed photo of himself from his time in Vietnam on the mantelpiece. He's young, covered in mud, holding a rifle, his eyes hard. He sees it as a portrait of authentic service. A few years ago, my mom put a photo of me next to it. It was from my promotion ceremony to full colonel. I was in my formal dress uniform, the silver eagle gleaming on my shoulder, my chest adorned with the ribbons I had earned over the years. One Christmas, my dad was standing in front of the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand, and I saw him looking at the 2 photos. "You know what the problem is with your new military, Elena," he said, pointing a thumb at my picture. "Too many ribbons, not enough mud, too many computers, not enough calluses. It's all clean." Clean? He said it like it was an insult, and in his world, my career was clean, sterile, and intellectual. It wasn't visceral. It wasn't real. I was a keyboard officer. Which brings me to last week. I was at my desk at the Pentagon, in the middle of a briefing on a new hypersonic missile threat, when my personal cell phone rang. It was my mom. Her voice was bubbling with an excitement that I knew, instinctively, had nothing to do with me. "Elena, I have the most wonderful news. It's Chloe." "What's happened?" I asked, closing the classified folder on my desk. "She's made it. She's graduating from basic training. We just got the letter with the details for Family Day and the ceremony." "Oh, Elena, your father is he's fit to burst. He's so proud. He's been polishing his old medals all morning." I felt a familiar, sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. I knew what was coming next. "We're all going, of course. We've booked a hotel just outside the base. Elena, you have to be there. It would mean the world to Chloe, and to your father. He wants the whole family there to see his real soldier graduate." The phrase, real soldier, was a deliberate dagger, and she knew it. "Mom, I don't know," I said, looking at my schedule, which was a wall of red-stamped classified briefings. "Things are really critical here right now." "Don't be silly," she said, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "It's just for a weekend. You can take a break from your computer games for 2 days. This is important. This is family." There it was, the emotional checkmate. To refuse would be to declare myself a bad daughter and an unsupportive sister. It would be confirming their narrative that my work wasn't as important, that my world was secondary to theirs. "And Elena," she added, her voice softening into a tone of strategic advice, "you should wear your uniform, your dress uniform. I know you don't like to. But it would be nice for Chloe's new friends to see that her sister is a high-ranking officer. Even if it is, even if it is the Space Force." She didn't have to say it. The qualifier hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Wear my uniform as a prop, a supporting character's costume in the grand play of Chloe's success, against my better judgment, against every instinct screaming at me to protect my own peace. I heard myself agree. "Okay, Mom, I'll be there. Send me the flight details." So I agreed. The next morning, I submitted my leave request, canceled 3 high-level briefings, and delegated temporary command of my unit. I went home and pulled my service uniform from the back of my closet. It was perfectly pressed, the single silver star of a brigadier general gleaming on each shoulder. a symbol of 2 decades of relentless work, of sacrifice, of leadership, a symbol of a success so profound. They were utterly blind to it. I packed my bag. I would put on my uniform, the one they saw as a costume, and fly to South Carolina to attend the ceremony for the real soldier. I was a general, in command of the nation's military satellite constellations, heading into a battle where my rank meant less than nothing. The week leading up to the trip was a masterclass in psychological operations, with my family as the orchestrators and me as the target. My actual job, the one that involved a daily security briefing on the orbital positions of adversarial satellites and the cyber resilience of our national command structure, was forced onto the back burner. It was replaced by a far more perplexing and draining mission navigating the logistics of my family's expectations. The primary assault came via phone, wielded with devastating precision by my mother. "Alina, honey, it's me," she chirped. 3 days before my scheduled flight, I was just looking at hotels. Now, I found a lovely little motel just off I-77, about 15 minutes from the base. I think you should book a room there. The on-base guest housing is really for the families of the enlisted soldiers, and we don't want to take a spot from someone who really needs it. I stood in my minimalist apartment, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Potomac River, and processed what she was saying. I, a brigadier general in the United States military, was being told I wasn't a real family member and therefore didn't qualify for on-base lodging. The absurdity was breathtaking. "That's fine, Mom. I can book my own hotel," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Oh, wonderful," she said, relieved that a potential conflict had been avoided. "And that brings me to my other point. Your father and I were talking, and we think it's for the best if you don't wear your uniform to the graduation." I paused, a sleek black pen still in my hand, hovering over a document detailing payload specifications for a next-generation GPS satellite. "Why is that?" "Well, honey, this is Chloe's day," she explained, her voice syrupy with feigned reasonableness. "She has worked so hard. She's finally having her moment, and we just don't want anything to distract from that. Your uniform is, well, it's very blue, and all those things on the shoulders. It's a little flashy. You wouldn't want to show up your own sister. Would you just wear some nice slacks? Blend in. For Chloe. Blend in. That was the core of my mission brief. For a woman who commanded a global network of assets worth billions of dollars. My primary task for the weekend was to make myself as small and unnoticeable as possible, to hide my success, to downplay my rank, to essentially deny the reality of my own life, all so that my sister could have her moment in the sun, unburdened by my inconvenient achievements. "I understand, Mom," I said, the words tasting like metal in my mouth. "I'll wear civilian clothes." After I hung up, I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. Why did I agree? Why, after all these years, did their opinion still have the power to make me fold? The truth is, fighting them was just exhausting. It was a war of attrition I knew I could never win. Arguing with my father about the validity of my service was like arguing with a brick wall about the principles of aerodynamics. He was immovable, entrenched in his beliefs, and my mother was his loyal quartermaster, ensuring he was always supplied with a reality that supported his views. It was easier to just make a tactical retreat, to surrender the small hills to avoid a bloody battle over the entire mountain. My service, my world, was something my father couldn't comprehend. I remembered a conversation we'd had a few years back. When he'd come to visit me in D.C., I had made the mistake of trying to explain what I did. "Think of it this way, Dad," I'd said, trying to find an analogy he could grasp. "In your day, the high ground was a hill. You took the hill. You had the advantage. Today, the ultimate high ground is space. If you control space, you control communication, navigation, surveillance. You control the entire planet's information flow. My job is to be the keeper of that high ground." He had just shaken his head, a sad smile on his face. "That's all well and good, Elena. Very strategic. But we looked the enemy in the eye. We shared a foxhole. We felt the ground shake when the artillery came in. You can't get that from a computer screen. There's a difference between a warrior and a technician." A technician, that's all I was to him. a highly paid, well-educated technician playing a very sophisticated video game. He couldn't see the crushing responsibility that came with it. He didn't know about the time a solar flare threatened to knock out a key communications satellite, and my team had to work for 72 hours straight, writing new code on the fly to reorient the entire constellation, a silent, desperate battle that prevented a global communications blackout. He didn't know that the navigation data my unit provides is what allows a soldier like his beloved Chloe to call in an airstrike or a medevac with pinpoint accuracy. My strength was quiet. It was intellectual. It was preventing wars, not just fighting them. His strength was loud, physical, and visceral, and in his mind. Only the latter was real, and so, to keep the peace, to maintain the fragile illusion of a happy family, I learned to keep my world to myself. The physical act of packing felt like a formal surrender. I pulled my Space Force dress uniform from my closet. The jacket was a deep, midnight blue, almost black, with a sharp, high collar and a row of gleaming silver buttons. The silver-laced braid on the sleeves denoted my rank. On the shoulders sat the single, polished silver stars of a brigadier general. It was a beautiful uniform, a symbol of everything I had worked for, a symbol of my actual life. I folded it carefully and placed it at the very bottom of my suitcase, beneath the simple black trousers and gray cashmere sweater my mother would approve of. It felt like burying a part of myself. The night before my flight, Chloe called me. It was one of her designated call times from the base, and her voice was different. The girlish softness was gone, replaced by a new, rougher edge. She sounded exhausted, but also proud. "Hey," she said, her voice raspy. "Mom said you were coming. I wouldn't miss it." I lied. "Good, it's been hell, Alina. But a good hell. You know, it's the hardest thing I've ever done." She talked for 10 minutes about marching, about the rifle range, about the endless push-ups, and she talked about her drill sergeant. "You won't believe this guy. Drill Sergeant Evans," she said, her voice a mixture of terror and absolute reverence. "He's like a god, a very angry, very loud god. He's a legend. Did 3 tours in Afghanistan. They say he can run a marathon in under 3 hours and then field strip a machine gun in 30 seconds. He's the toughest, most intimidating man I've ever met. I've seen grown men cry when he just looks at them." I listened, a strange sense of dramatic irony washing over me. Here was my sister, a private at the very bottom of the military food chain, speaking with breathless awe about a man who was in the grand, intricate hierarchy of the armed forces. An E7, a sergeant first class, a respected and vital rank, to be sure, but a rank that would be required to address me as ma'am and salute me on sight. "He sounds dedicated," I offered. "He's more than dedicated," she breathed. "He's the real deal. He's what a soldier is supposed to be. Not like, well, you know." I knew, not like you. "Hey, Dad said you were going to wear your uniform," she said, changing the subject. "But Mom said she told you not to. I think that's a good idea." "Oh, you do?" "Yeah," she said, completely oblivious to the sting in her words. "It's just, you know, your uniform is weird. It's all blue and fancy. And my drill sergeant, he's old school Army. He makes fun of the Air Force all the time, calls them the air mattress. I can't even imagine what he'd say about the Space Force. It would just be awkward. Just come looking like a normal person." Okay, a normal person, not a general, not her sister. Just a normal, anonymous person, a spectator. "Don't worry, Chloe," I said. My voice as smooth as ice. "I'll be the most normal person you've ever seen." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, running through the mission parameters for the weekend. Not my real mission of commanding a global defense network, but my family mission. Objective: survive the weekend. Primary task: remain small, unassuming, and supportive of the designated family hero. Secondary task: avoid any and all conversations that might lead to a conflict with Dad. Rules of engagement: do not discuss my actual job. Do not display any evidence of rank or success. Do not, under any circumstances, upstage the private. Have you ever had to create a detailed battle plan just to go home for the holidays? It's a special kind of exhausting. isn't it? I finally got out of bed and walked to my desk. I picked up my flight confirmation. It was time. Time to deploy to Fort Jackson. A battlefield where the rules were written by someone else, where my armor was a liability, and where I was already positioned to lose. Stepping onto the grounds of Fort Jackson, South Carolina, was like stepping into my father's memories. The air was thick and humid, smelling of pine needles, hot asphalt, and the faint, unmistakable scent of diesel fuel. In the distance, I could hear the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of a helicopter and the faint, percussive shouting of a platoon calling cadence as they ran. This was the heart of the U.S. Army's infantry training, the forge that had shaped my father's entire identity. For me, it was alien territory. For him, it was a homecoming. "Ah, smell that," he said, taking a deep, theatrical breath as we got out of the car. He wasn't talking to me or my mother. He was talking to the world. That's the smell of discipline. They don't have that smell at your fancy headquarters, do they, Elena? Our air is filtered, Dad, I said, my voice flat. He just grunted, a sound of dismissive victory, and strode toward the massive reception building where hundreds of other families were gathering. The place was buzzing, a chaotic hive of nervous excitement. Proud mothers clutched tissues. Fathers tried to look stoic and failed, and little kids waved tiny American flags. We were all there for the same reason, to witness the transformation of our children, our siblings, our spouses, into soldiers. My mother, a master of social navigation, immediately started chatting with a woman whose son was in Chloe's platoon. "Oh, yes, Chloe found it so difficult at first," my mom said, her voice dripping with pride disguised as humility. "She's always been such a tough cookie, though takes after her father." I stood beside them, a silent accessory in my plain black trousers and gray sweater. I had obeyed my mother's orders. I had blended in this sea of Army-strong t-shirts and patriotic paraphernalia. I was utterly anonymous, a ghost in the machine. After an hour of briefings and welcome speeches, we were led out to a vast parade ground under the punishing South Carolina sun. In the distance, a formation of soldiers stood at rigid attention. Then, a command was barked, and the formation broke. The soldiers were released. A wave of humanity surged forward as families rushed to find their recruits. The reunion was exactly as dramatic as I had anticipated. My mother shrieked Chloe's name. My father's stoic facade crumbled as he wrapped his daughter in a hug, his shoulders shaking. Chloe looked different. She was 20 pounds lighter, all lean muscle and sinew. Her skin was tanned. Her hair was scraped back severely, and her eyes had a new hardness to them, a look of weary confidence. The soft, slightly lost girl who had left home 10 weeks ago was gone. In her place was a soldier. "I did it," she whispered into my father's shoulder. "I actually did it. I never doubted you for a second. Kid," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I had never, ever heard him use for me. She finally turned to me, her hug quick and awkward, a collision of bone and muscle. "Hey, Elena," she said, looking me up and down. "You came." "Of course I did," I said. "I'm proud of you, Chloe." "Thanks," she said, but her eyes were already scanning the crowd, looking for her friends. "Come on. You have to meet my battle buddies." And so began the next phase of my mission enduring the introductions. Chloe pulled us over to a group of equally exhausted-looking young soldiers. "Guys, this is my family," she announced. "This is my mom, and this is my dad." He was a command sergeant major back in the day. The young recruits immediately straightened up, their eyes wide with respect for my father. "An honor to meet you, Sergeant Major," one of them said. My father beamed, soaking it in. He was royalty here. "And this," Chloe said, gesturing to me, "is my sister, Elena." Just that, Elena. Not my sister, the general. Not even my sister, the officer. Just Elena. The name hung there, devoid of title or context. The recruits gave me a polite, uninterested nod before turning their attention back to the man of consequence. My father. My mother, sensing a social void that needed filling, quickly started a conversation with the parents of one of Chloe's friends. "Oh, yes. We're just so proud," she gushed. "And this is our older daughter, Elena." How lovely, the other mother said, giving me a warm smile. Is your daughter in the service as well? Oh, yes, my mother said, her voice dropping slightly, as if sharing a slightly embarrassing secret. Technically, she's in the Space Force. It's very different. Mostly computers and things. Ah, the other woman said, her smile becoming slightly strained with confusion. How interesting. Technically. The word was a slap. It was a verbal asterisk placed next to my life's work. I was in the military. Technically, I was a success. Technically, but not really, not in the way that mattered. The main event of Family Day was a live fire demonstration and a showcase of the skills the recruits had learned. We were all herded onto a set of bleachers overlooking a training field. And that's when he appeared. Drill Sergeant Evans. He strode to the center of the field, and a hush fell over the crowd. He was everything Chloe had described and more. He was not a large man, but he radiated an aura of such intense, controlled aggression that he seemed to take up all the air around him. His jaw was set like concrete. His campaign hat was pulled low, casting his eyes in shadow, and his uniform was so starched and crisp it looked like it could stop a bullet. He was the living embodiment of every military movie trope, and he was terrifyingly real. "Welcome, families," he barked, and his voice was not a human sound. It was a roar, a percussive blast that hit you in the chest. I saw several of the civilian parents flinch. My father, on the other hand, leaned forward, a look of pure, unadulterated admiration on his face. "Now that," he muttered under his breath, "is a goddamn drill sergeant. That's a man who makes soldiers." For the next 30 minutes, D.S. Evans put his platoon through their paces. They marched with breathtaking precision. They demonstrated hand-to-hand combat techniques. They charged a position with bayonets fixed, their war cries tearing through the humid air. It was a piece of theater, of course, a performance designed to instill pride in the families and justify the hell their children had just endured. And it was working. The crowd was captivated. I watched it all with a professional's eye. I respected the discipline, the conditioning, the raw power on display. But I also saw the bigger picture. I saw the young soldiers, many of them barely out of their teens, being forged into instruments of national policy, a policy that was, in part, shaped by the data and capabilities that my command provided. The soldier on the ground and the general in the command center were two parts of the same vast, complex machine. But in my father's world, only the part you could see and touch was real. After the demonstration, the recruits were released for the final time. Chloe came running over, her face flushed with adrenaline and pride. She was mobbed by our parents, by her friends, by their parents. She was the star of the show, the hero of the hour. I stood on the edge of the happy, chaotic group, feeling a familiar sense of detachment. I was watching my family through a pane of glass. I was there, but I wasn't really a part of it. Chloe, to her credit, noticed me standing alone. She came over, her arm around the shoulders of her best friend from the platoon. "Hey, Alina," she said, her voice still buzzing with energy. "You holding up okay? I know this must all be pretty intense for you." I looked at her. Her eyes, which used to be filled with a familiar, soft uncertainty, were now clear and confident. She was looking at me with genuine pity. She thought I was overwhelmed by the noise, the uniforms, the sheer arminess of it all. "It's a lot different than what you're used to, right?" she continued, a small, knowing smile on her face. "It's not exactly a library." That was it. That was the lowest point. My little sister, standing in the middle of a basic training field, explaining to a one-star general that the military was intense. The condescension was so pure, so deeply felt. She had no idea she was even doing it. "Right," I said, my voice hollow. "Not exactly a library." Oh, Chloe's eyes suddenly lit up as she looked over my shoulder. "You have to meet him. D.S. Evans is coming over, everybody. Be cool." A wave of nervous excitement went through our little group. The legend was approaching. My father straightened his posture, puffing out his chest, ready to meet a man he considered a true warrior. My mother smoothed down her dress. I braced myself. The architect of my sister's success was about to meet the living symbol of her family's greatest misunderstanding. This was going to be the final, most public humiliation of the day. This was going to be fun. Drill Sergeant Evans approached our group with the predatory grace of a panther. He didn't walk. He glided over the chewed-up grass of the parade field. His campaign hat pulled low and level, casting a shadow of pure intimidation over his face. The other families instinctively parted before him, creating a clear path. His presence was a tangible force, a vortex of discipline and raw authority that demanded respect. My father's reaction was immediate and profound. He physically straightened his spine, his shoulders squared, a subconscious echo of his own past. He looked like a devout parishioner about to meet the Pope. My mother, on the other hand, looked like she was about to be audited by the most terrifying man on earth. She clutched her purse to her chest with both hands. Chloe was a nervous wreck, her proud, newly minted soldier persona crumbling back into that of a terrified trainee in the presence of her god. "Drill Sergeant," Chloe said, her voice trembling just slightly as he came to a halt before us. "This is my family." D.S. Evans gave a curt, sharp nod, his eyes like chips of obsidian sweeping over us in a quick, dismissive assessment. His gaze lingered for a second on my father, acknowledging a fellow veteran, then flickered past my mother, and finally, over me, without a hint of recognition, in my simple gray sweater and black trousers. I was just another piece of civilian background scenery. I was nothing. It was, in a strange way, exactly what I had wanted. "So," the drill sergeant said, his voice a low growl, directed at Chloe but meant for all of us. "You think this one has what it takes to be a soldier?" Before Chloe could stammer out a reply, my father stepped forward, his hand outstretched, a broad man-to-man smile on his face. This was his moment to connect, to be seen as a peer by this paragon of military virtue. "Drill Sergeant Evans, it is a genuine honor to meet you. Command Sergeant Major Vance, retired." My father boomed, his voice full of pride and bonhomie. 30 years in the infantry. It's good to see they still make drill sergeants like you." A flicker of something professional respect crossed D.S. Evans's face. He took my father's hand and gave it a single, firm shake. "An honor to meet you, Sergeant Major," he said, his voice losing none of its gravelly edge. Good to see some real leadership in the crowd. Real leadership. The words were a balm to my father's soul. He was validated. He and the drill sergeant spent a few minutes exchanging old army pleasantries, speaking the coded language of veterans. They talked about how basic training was tougher back in the day, about the merits of different rifle cleaning techniques, about the general softness of the modern world. My mother and Chloe listened with rapt attention. I just stood there, a silent observer at a meeting of a club to which I would never be admitted. It was during a lull in this mutual admiration session that my father, feeling expansive and completely at ease, made the fateful move. He clapped D.S. Evans on the shoulder like an old friend and then, with a wide, knowing wink, gestured over to me. "Well, you've met my soldier," he said, nodding at Chloe with immense pride. "And this here is my other daughter, Alina." He paused for dramatic effect. "She took the easy route. She's one of your fancy officers, in the Space Force." He said Space Force with a deep, rumbling chuckle, the same way one might say the Lollipop Guild. He looked at D.S. Evans, expecting him to share in the joke being me, my career, my life. It was a perfect, casual, and utterly brutal dismissal, delivered in front of the one man whose respect my father valued. Drill Sergeant Evans, a slight smirk already forming on his lips in camaraderie with my father, turned his head to look at me, and the world stopped. It didn't stop suddenly. It stopped in a slow, agonizing, frame-by-frame sequence of events that I will have etched into my memory for the rest of my life. His eyes, which had been about to crinkle in shared amusement, first registered me as a shape, a woman, a civilian. Then, his highly trained brain, a brain conditioned to recognize threats, patterns, and hierarchies, started processing the data. He wasn't just looking at a person, he was scanning a target, my face. He had seen it before. I could see the exact moment the connection was made. The smirk on his lips didn't just fade, it collapsed. The casual, leaning posture he held while talking to my father vanished in an instant. His body didn't just straighten, it snapped into the most rigid, severe, and perfect position of attention a human body can achieve. his hands clenched into fists at his sides. His chin was tucked in, and his eyes were locked forward, staring at a point somewhere just over my head. He looked like he had been struck by lightning. The blood drained from his face, leaving his tanned skin a pale, ashen gray. His jaw, which had been set in a confident line, was now tight with what looked like pure, unadulterated terror. My family, caught up in their joke, didn't notice for a second, but the silence stretched. The shared laugh my father was expecting from the drill sergeant never came. My dad's smile faltered. He looked at the drill sergeant's stiff, petrified form. He looked at me, at my calm, unreadable expression. He looked back at the drill sergeant. The gears in his head were grinding, trying to compute a result that was impossible. Chloe saw it next. Her proud smile dissolved, replaced by a look of utter bewilderment. Why was her God, the fearsome D.S. Evans, suddenly acting like a terrified private? My mother's hand flew to her throat, her social instincts screaming at her that something had gone terribly, terribly wrong. The silence in our little circle became a vortex, pulling in the sounds around us and extinguishing them. The chatter of other families faded. The distant cadence calls seemed to die out. There was only the hot sun, the smell of cut grass, and the sight of this legendary combat-hardened drill sergeant, trembling almost imperceptibly before his private's failure of a sister. He cleared his throat, but the sound that came out was a strangled squeak, a pathetic shadow of his earlier roar. His eyes were still locked forward, not daring to meet mine directly. He stammered. The man whose voice could make grown men weep was stammering. "Ma'am," he began, the word forced out, tight and high-pitched. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He tried again. I apologize, ma'am. I didn't recognize you out of uniform." My father's jaw dropped. Literally, it just hung open. "Ma'am." D.S. Evans's eyes finally, hesitantly, flickered toward my face, filled with a look of dawning horror and disbelief. "General Vance," he whispered, his voice cracking. The question was not an inquiry. It was a confirmation of a terrifying, impossible fact. He took a half-step back, as if my civilian presence had a physical force pushing him away. He tried one more time, the words tumbling out in a rush of pure panic. "General, ma'am." The two words hung in the air, shimmering in the heat. "General, ma'am." They were a grenade, and he had just pulled the pin, dropping it right in the center of my family's perfect day. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a universe being unmade. My father's face was a perfect blank, a canvas of pure, uncomprehending shock. My mother looked like she was going to faint. Chloe just stared, her face pale, her eyes darting between the terrified drill sergeant and me, the sister she had pitied her entire life. I finally allowed myself a small, quiet sigh. The charade was over. I met the drill sergeant's terrified gaze. "It's quite all right, drill sergeant," I said. And my voice was calm, quiet, and clear. It was the voice of command, a voice they had never heard. "You're doing excellent work with these soldiers. Carry on." "Yes, ma'am, thank you." "Ma'am," he barked, his voice still choked with shock. He gave a nod so sharp and violent it looked like it hurt. Then he turned on his heel and all but fled, disappearing into the crowd as fast as his polished boots could carry him. He left behind a smoking crater where my family's reality used to be. They just stood there, frozen, staring at me. They weren't looking at Anya, the daughter, the sister, the failure. They were looking at a general, and they had absolutely no idea who I was. In the space created by a drill sergeant's panicked salute, 30 years of my family's history had just been rewritten in an instant. The moment after Drill Sergeant Evans fled was one of the strangest silences I have ever experienced. It wasn't an empty silence. It was dense, heavy, and filled with the screeching sound of a foundational reality grinding to a halt. The cheerful chatter of the surrounding families, the distant pop-pop-pop of a rifle range. The very air itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. We were a statue garden of shock in the middle of a bustling field. My father's jaw was still hanging open, his face a pasty, unhealthy gray. My mother looked back and forth between me and the space where the drill sergeant had been. as if she could force him to reappear and retract his words through sheer force of will. And Chloe, my sister, stood there, her new soldierly confidence shattered, looking at me with the wide, terrified eyes of a child who had just seen a monster step out of her closet. The other families and recruits around us had noticed. Of course, they had. The whispers started almost immediately, a low buzz that spread through the crowd. "Did you see that? That was Drill Sergeant Evans. He looked like he saw a ghost." "Who is she?" The spotlight, which had been so warmly and comfortably shining on Chloe all day, had now swiveled and locked onto me with the intensity of a prison searchlight, and I, in my unassuming civilian clothes, was suddenly the most conspicuous person on the field. It was I who broke the spell. The situation required command, and I was the only one present capable of it. "I think it's time to go," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the thick, stunned silence. It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order. The sound of my voice seemed to jolt them back into motion, but they moved like automatons, their limbs stiff and uncoordinated. The long walk back to the parking lot was a silent parade of shame and confusion. My father, who had strode onto this base like a returning king, now seemed to want to shrink into himself. My mother walked with her eyes fixed on the gravel path, as if she couldn't bear to look up. Chloe walked a few paces behind me, her gaze burning into my back. I could feel her questions, her disbelief, her anger, radiating off her like heat. We piled into the rental car, a cramped beige vessel that was about to become a pressure cooker. My father started the engine, his movements jerky and uncertain, for a full 5 minutes. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioner struggling against the humid Carolina air. We pulled out of the parking lot and onto the main road of the base, driving past identical barracks and perfectly manicured lawns. The world outside the car was orderly and disciplined. Inside, it was pure chaos. It was Chloe who finally detonated the bomb of silence. "General," she asked, the word coming out as a strangled, incredulous whisper from the back seat. She wasn't asking a question. She was testing the reality of the sound. "He called you a general." My mother started to cry, soft, gulping sobs of a woman whose social world had just been irrevocably broken. "Elena." What was that, she wept? Who was that man? Why would he say such a terrible, confusing thing? A terrible, confusing thing. That's what my rank was to her. Not an achievement, not a source of pride, just a social catastrophe. "Don't be a fool, Mary," my father growled, his voice rough. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "You saw his face. That wasn't a mistake." He glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes filled with a dark, stormy mixture of anger and betrayal. "What have you been doing, Elena? What in the hell have you really been doing all these years?" The interrogation had begun. The old me, the peacekeeper, would have tried to de-escalate. I would have tried to explain it away, to minimize it, to manage their emotions until the storm passed. But I was done managing their emotions. It was time they learned to manage their own. I answered them with calm, simple facts, delivering each one like a precise, surgical cut. To my mother, I said, "It wasn't a confusing thing. Mom, it was a statement of fact. That's my rank." To Chloe's whispered disbelief, I said, "Yes, Chloe, the Space Force has generals, just like the Army does. We are a branch of the United States Armed Forces." And to my father's angry demand, I said, "I've been doing my job, Dad. The same job I've had for 20 years. I serve my country, just like you did." My answers didn't soothe them. They were like gasoline on a fire. They offered no emotional handhold, no room for argument, just the cold, hard, and undeniable truth. "A general," my father exploded, his voice so loud it made the windows vibrate. He smacked the steering wheel with the heel of his hand. "A general. And you didn't think to tell me your own father, a command sergeant major who spent 30 years in uniform. Do you have any idea how foolish you just made me look standing there, joking with that drill sergeant, while my own daughter is a goddamn general officer? The disrespect. Elena." The sheer disrespect. This was the heart of it. His pride, his ego. He wasn't angry that I was a success. He was furious that my success had made a fool out of him. I leaned forward from the back seat, my voice remaining quiet and even, a stark contrast to his rage. Respect, I asked, the word hanging in the air. Let's talk about respect, Dad. For the last 10 years, you have called my branch of service a joke. You've called me a keyboard officer and a space cadet. You've told me, to my face, that my service isn't real. You have never, not once, shown a shred of genuine respect for my career. Why would I ever share my greatest professional achievement with a man who I knew would only belittle it? The truth hit him like a physical blow. I saw his shoulders slump. The righteous anger drained out of him, leaving behind only the gray, ashen look of a man who had been confronted with a mirror he didn't want to look into. He had no response. Because there was no response. I was right. My mother tried a different tactic, her voice pleading. But we're your family, honey. We love you. We didn't understand what you did. We were worried you weren't happy. I know you love me, Mom, I said. And for the first time, a note of weariness entered my voice, but your love always felt like it came with a side of pity. Your worry always felt like a judgment. I didn't need you to understand the technical details of my job. I just needed you to believe in me, to trust that I was a capable adult on a valid path. I needed respect, and I never got it. We drove the rest of the way to their motel in silence. It was a cheap, 2-story building with peeling paint job and a flickering neon sign. Located on a sad stretch of highway, it was a world away from the manicured precision of the base, and an even further world away from my life in D.C. The contrast was a fitting backdrop for the utter implosion of our family's narrative. My father pulled into a parking spot and killed the engine. The sudden silence was absolute. The celebration for Chloe was a distant, forgotten memory. The day was in ruins, but it was a ruin built from the truth. We all just sat there, trapped in the car, trapped in the wreckage of the moment. Finally, I reached for the door handle. I'm going to my hotel, I announced. My flight is tomorrow afternoon. I think we all need some space. My mother's head snapped up. You're not staying with us. No, I said simply. You can't just leave, Chloe cried out from beside me, her voice filled with a desperate, childish panic. You can't just drop this on us and walk away. You have to explain. I got out of the car and looked at them through the open door. My sister, the new, tough soldier, looked like a lost little girl. My father, the proud sergeant major, looked old and defeated. My mother, the family's social glue, looked completely unmoored. They were all looking at me, waiting for me to fix it, to make it make sense. I realized in that moment that the power shift was complete. It wasn't just about my rank. It was about my refusal to continue playing the part they had assigned me. There's nothing to explain, I said, my voice soft but unyielding. I didn't do this to you. I just kept living my life. I just kept working. The person I am today is the person I have been becoming for 20 years. The only thing that changed is that today, for the first time, you were forced to see it. I closed the car door. A soft, final click. I turned and walked toward the taxi I had called from the base, which was waiting for me at the edge of the parking lot. I didn't look back. I could feel their eyes on me. 3 pairs of eyes, watching the daughter, the sister, the failure, the general, walk away. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one being left behind. I was the one who was leaving. And they were the ones who were stuck, lost in the past, trying to figure out how to put the pieces of their shattered world back together. The hotel room I had booked was a world away from the peeling paint motel where my family was marinating in their confusion. It was a sleek, modern space on an upper floor, with a cool, minimalist aesthetic and a single, vast window that overlooked the city lights. I stood there for a long time, watching the traffic flow like streams of red and white corpuscles in the veins of the city. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel a surge of vindictive joy. I just felt quiet. It was the profound, echoing quiet that comes after a bomb has gone off, after the debris has settled and you're left standing in the crater of what used to be. The old world was gone. The family structure I had known for my entire life, with its rigid hierarchy of my father's approval, my sister's heroism, and my own designated failure, had been pulverized, and I, the ghost in their machine, was the only one left standing with a clear head. I didn't check my phone. I knew it would be a chaotic mess of their emotions, anger, betrayal, confusion. I had no interest in wading into that swamp. Instead, I did what I always do when faced with a complex, volatile situation. I focused on my real job. My secure laptop was on the desk. I opened it, and the familiar, encrypted interface of my command network blinked to life. A red flag was waiting for me in my inbox. An urgent update from my deputy at Peterson Space Force Base. It was a technical issue. A high-orbit surveillance satellite, one of our most critical assets, was experiencing unexpected telemetry fluctuations. Not a crisis, but a problem that required a calm, methodical, and immediate solution. I spent the next 2 hours on a secure video call with my top engineers, analyzing data, running diagnostics, and issuing a series of precise commands to reroute data streams and stabilize the satellite's systems. My team, a group of the brightest minds from the Air Force, MIT, and NASA, responded to my orders with a simple, respectful, "Yes, ma'am." They didn't question my authority. They didn't doubt my competence. They simply executed the mission. In this world, I was not a keyboard officer. I was the commander. I was General Vance. And being here, in my element, was the only thing that felt real. The attempts at contact began the next morning. They were different now. The demanding tones were gone, replaced by a new, unfamiliar hesitation. The first was a text from Chloe, just 3 words. "Are you okay?" It was a simple question, but it was a universe away from the condescending pity she had shown me just yesterday. For the first time, she was asking about my feelings, not projecting her own assumptions onto me. It was a tiny crack of light in the wall between us. I texted back, "I'm fine. Are you?" I didn't get a response for over an hour. The phone call from my parents came as I was packing for my flight home. I let it ring twice before answering, putting it on speaker as I folded a shirt. "Elena," it was my mother's voice, small and fragile. "Hi, Mom. Your father and we're here." I could hear him muttering in the background. We just wanted to ask. That star on the uniform in your promotion picture, the one from a few years ago? We thought it was just, a fancy bird." "It's an eagle for a colonel, Mom," I said, not unkindly. "The star is for a general." "A general." My father's voice rumbled onto the line. It was flat, devoid of its usual bluster. "How long?" "I was promoted 6 months ago," I said simply. "6 months," he repeated, the words sounding hollow. "And you didn't tell us." This was it, the final charge, the last accusation of disrespect. But now, I was ready. "Dad," I said, my voice calm and clear, like a final briefing before a mission. "Let me ask you a question. If I had called you 6 months ago and told you I had been promoted to Brigadier General in the Space Force, what would your honest gut reaction have been?" The silence on the other end of the line was my answer. He wouldn't have believed it, or he would have dismissed it. He would have made a joke about me being the general of the Starship Enterprise. He would not have offered the same thunderous, tearful pride he had given Chloe for becoming a private. We both knew it. "Our relationship has to change," I continued, laying down the new terms of engagement. This was my new mission, to establish a chain of command in my own family, one based on mutual respect. The old way is over from now on. You will speak to me as an equal. You will speak about my career, my branch, and my service with respect. The jokes about space cadets and the easy route are finished. You will no longer offer me unsolicited advice about my life. You will trust me as the capable, successful adult I have been for a very long time. I paused, letting the words land. If you can agree to those terms, then we can start to build a real relationship. If not, then there's nothing more to talk about. I could hear my mother start to cry softly. My father let out a long, heavy sigh, the sound of a man surrendering a lifelong position. "Okay, Elena," he said, his voice raspy with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "Okay, we can do that." The months that followed were a study in awkward recalibration. There was no magical, tearful reunion. The chasm between us was too wide to be crossed in a single leap. It had to be bridged, one clumsy, tentative step at a time. The phone calls became less frequent, but more substantial, my father would call and ask me, with genuine curiosity, to explain what a geosynchronous orbit was. My mother would tell me about her day, and then, instead of offering advice, she would simply ask, "And how was your day, honey?" They were learning a new language. The biggest change came from Chloe. About 4 months after graduation, she called me from her advanced individual training base. "Hey, Elena," she said, her voice still holding that new, hard edge of a soldier. "I have a question." "Go ahead." "There's this sergeant in my new unit," she began. "He's a real piece of work. He's always on my case, micromanaging everything I do. I'm doing everything by the book, but I can't seem to win. You've been an officer for a long time. How do you deal with someone like that?" I almost smiled. She was asking for my advice, not because she pitied me, but because she respected my experience. She was, for the first time, seeing me not as her weird sister, but as a fellow soldier, a much, much more senior soldier. "You don't try to win, Chloe," I told her, shifting into my mentor mode. "You just do your job so flawlessly, so professionally, that his criticisms become irrelevant. You be better, you be smarter. You make him look foolish for ever doubting you." "Huh," she said after a moment. "Okay, I can do that." Last night, I stood in the command center of the National Space Defense Center. On the massive screen in front of me, a constellation of blue and green lights represented the thousands of assets in orbit. Our eyes and ears in the sky, we were tracking a piece of rogue Chinese space debris that threatened to collide with a vital weather satellite. My team, a quiet symphony of focused experts, worked flawlessly under my command, plotting new trajectories and preparing mitigation maneuvers. This was my world. This was my strength. It wasn't the loud, visceral strength of a bayonet charge or the gritty strength of a forced march. It was the quiet, immense strength of intellect, of strategy, of seeing the entire battlefield from 22,000 miles above the earth. It was no less real, no less vital, and no less worthy of respect. It took my family 30 years and the shock of a terrified drill sergeant to finally see it. But the truth is, their validation was never the mission objective. The mission was for me to see it, to own it, to stop apologizing for the fact that my power didn't look the way they thought it should. So, if you're out there, and your life, your passion, your success doesn't fit into the neat little box your family or society has built for you, please hear this. Your strength is not defined by their understanding of it. Your victory is not contingent on their applause. You don't need them to see the stars on your shoulders to know that you are a general in your own right. You just need to assume command of your own life. Trust me, the right people will salute.